From Doom to The Legend of Zelda and Warcraft to Half-Life, the art of map design is practically as old as the world of gaming itself. But even though it may seem easy enough to throw a map together, there's actually a huge amount of planning and effort that goes into creating one. And when it comes to the world of multiplayer maps, a couple of perfectly designed ones can spell the difference between your game being universally loved by millions or a total nothing burger. So what does it take to craft the perfect multiplayer map? Let's dig in and find out. It's important to note that there isn't a specific formula when it comes to map design, but there are several different aspects to consider before getting into creating one. Firstly, developers need to think of a setting or theme. For example, Dust 2, which is widely regarded as Counter-Strike's greatest map, and probably one of the greatest multiplayer maps in history, is set in a Moroccan souk, so everything in the map makes liberal use of distinct Moroccan designs and aesthetics. Obviously this alone doesn't make for a great multiplayer map, but something about Dust 2's overall size, layout, and bomb site locations has resonated with millions of fans for many years. In many ways, Dust 2's success lies in its simplicity and the fact that there are tunnels, terraces, half-open doors, and wide-open spaces that are starkly contrasted by some very tight areas where close-quarters combat is often more advantageous. You can hide or take cover behind crates, throw flashbangs around corners, get the drop on your enemies who might be camping, and basically employ a range of different strategies to prevail. What really makes Dust 2 so iconic is its super clean design, endless replayability, and unrivaled sense of balance. The fact of the matter is, even if you don't stumble upon someone immediately after respawning, you know you're going to encounter an enemy soon enough, so there's never a moment to rest. Playing Dust 2 means that there's always action and always a new challenge, so it's no wonder it's been the flagship map of Counter-Strike for the longest time. Ultimately, what's important to take into account with map design comes down to a few fundamentals. First and foremost is pacing. This relies on several factors, but chief of these is the actual size of a map. Too big and expansive, and things get boring quickly. However, if it's too small, you could be killed soon after respawning or just find that you never have time to come up with some kind of game plan. Simply put, perfect multiplayer maps are in that Goldilocks zone when it comes to map size, spawn points, and maximum number of players, which needs to be taken into consideration when figuring out a map's scale. Second is functionality and layout. It's no fun playing a map where paths are limited or cramped and don't allow for some measure of strategy. Are there things to hide or take cover behind? Can you climb up ladders and in through windows instead of taking the door? Are there any areas where players may be exposed for extended periods of time, thereby discouraging them from accessing said areas? It's important to ask and answer these questions when designing a map, as it will inevitably determine whether it's liked by players or not. Next is variety. It's a bad idea to go too far outside of the frame, but is there enough variation in the environment to keep things interesting? For example, if you look at Vondel from Call of Duty Warzone, it's modeled after European cities such as Haarlem and Utrecht. While you'll find a good amount of buildings that are distinctly Dutch and harken back to a bygone era, there are also areas to remind you that you're actually experiencing life in modern times. So yes, there are paved, quaint-looking streets, a museum, canals, and even a graveyard, but there's also a mall, university, and police station. When you run around Vondel and explore its various locations, you feel like you're in an actual European town, complete with all the infrastructure you would expect in the real world. But even though there's variety, nothing feels out of place or mismatched, so this is where much of the balance is realized. The larger the map, the more points of interest you need to populate it with so that, in the absence of firefights with other players, gamers don't get bored or feel like they're wasting their time. The thing is, the devs at Activision know that their fans love urban environments, so this is one of the many reasons Vondel is as good as it is. And of course, different players have their own playstyle, so Vondel does its very best to cater to each of these. There are opportunities to engage in melee combat, as well as many zones where you can make use of SMGs or machine guns to down groups of enemies who might not be paying enough attention. And if you like going long range and using scoped weapons, Vondel has plenty of elevated areas where you can do just that. Another stroke of genius with Vondel is that traversal has also been taken into account here. Players can choose to employ a parkour or free-running approach when crossing the tops of townhouses in Vondel. If you really want to feel like an action hero, you can leap over gaps and grab onto ledges while avoiding incoming fire from foes. And I think this is yet another element to consider when it comes to map design: novelty. People remember maps for different reasons, but if there's a certain part of its design or layout that acts as a kind of hook, you'll have players coming back again and again to get those dopamine hits they so desperately crave. One such reason Vondel is unique is because of its waterways and rooftops, and in this particular map, players can make use of the Tactical Amphibious Vehicle, or TAV, if they want to get around faster and not have to go on foot if they enter a waterway or vice versa. These kinds of considerations go a long way in ensuring that the flow of gameplay is never interrupted and that players get to enjoy a seamless experience that is always filled with new encounters and a ton of fun. So while this is all well and good, how does the whole design process for a multiplayer map actually begin? Again, this isn't an exact science by any means, but if you look at the way Valorant's designers approach map creation, you should be able to get some better insights. To start, the designers will create what's called a grey box map that has virtually no textures or unique elements and is used to determine the map's layout. Of course, you also have to wonder if the designers have any kind of theme in mind before they create a grey box level, but according to them, they often consider the two more or less at the same time. In other words, a specific theme may give way to a grey box design, or conversely, while designing a grey box map, potential themes will spring to mind. The thing that the map designers at Valorant stay aware of at all times is gameplay first, so before any final details or embellishments are added, they play with the grey box design and figure out what elements should be added, altered, or even removed entirely. Ultimately, people like to have a variety of maps to choose from, and in the case of Valorant, each map compels you to adapt your playstyle accordingly. And tying into the novelty point I raised earlier, Valorant's map artists will always try to include some kind of gimmick or hook that make a particular map unique. For example, Bind has teleporters while Fracture allows players to use ziplines. These unique features on each map ensures that no two games of Valorant feel the same and that each map has its own distinct personality and gameplay options. But no matter the map, a lot of playtesting takes place so that adjustments can be made accordingly. And once everybody is happy that the way gameplay works in a given map is as good as it can possibly be, they will add any final tweaks and elements and prepare it for the public to enjoy. But even a careful approach isn't foolproof, and so it's important for developers to listen to players so that they can make further adjustments if necessary. And in some cases, if there's enough of a stink raised regarding a map's features, it could be pulled out of rotation and reworked so that it better suits the expectations of players. Sometimes the design process is straightforward and a map is an instant hit. But sometimes, even though a game's designers may think they've done a bang-up job, the community will ultimately decide whether they have or not. In this respect, it's sometimes a very difficult task to achieve the perfect multiplayer map, but if devs take the time to refine or alter what they've created, they can certainly reap the rewards. Right, so how about ammo drops, loot, vehicle placements, and power-ups? Much of this will depend on the game in question, but again, this is something that's very important to consider when designing a multiplayer map. Do you want players to be able to access special items easily? Is everything simply PvP, or are there PvE elements too? How many vehicles should a map contain? And for that matter, should it have any vehicles at all? Whether you can choose your loadout or agent before starting a match as in Valorant, get to pick up weapons and use power-ups in Quake Champions, or purchase weapons before the start of each new round in Counter-Strike, different games work very differently, and naturally this determines what will be included in the map and what won't. In this respect, there's a direct link between map design and gameplay mechanics, so any good designer will definitely want to keep this in mind at all times. I think what really makes a multiplayer map perfect is that its design takes a range of factors into account. The map size, layout, maximum number of players, theme, ammo and item placements, waypoints, points of interest, gameplay mechanics, and player expectations are all there and somehow aligned to bring about what one might consider the perfect multiplayer map. It's actually really interesting because if I think back to certain games, I often think of the locations I've explored in them and am amazed at how ingrained in my memory they are. I think this is where the whole idea of seeping into the subconscious comes in. It goes without saying that the best multiplayer maps are totally memorable. Even though I haven't played the map in months, I know every inch of Dust 2 and recall just about every minor detail in it, even now. And I even remember specific events that have unfolded in those different locations. I sometimes can't remember what I had for breakfast, so this really is testament to just how much of a game's pedigree is reflected in its map or level design. So no, there really isn't anything random about multiplayer maps, especially those we would consider perfect in virtually every way. Every last element from the textures to the placement of crates or gun emplacements is taken into careful consideration before it's released to the public, and when done right, a game can become legendary and supremely popular because of a single map that is perfectly crafted. And that's it for today's video, guys. What's your favorite multiplayer map, and why? Let us know in the comments. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for daily gaming, VR, and tech content. From me and the crew, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Later!